Hi all, and welcome to the Medical AI Lab reading group. Today I'm delighted that we have Elaine Liu presenting on CoCa, Contrastive Captioners or Image Text Foundation Models. Without further ado, Elaine, over to you, take it away.
All right, thanks Pranav. So hi all, so today I'll be presenting on the CoCa paper, Contrastive Captioners, Image Text Foundation Models. And this work is done by a team from Google Research led by Jiahui Yu and Zirui Wang and their team. And these two authors are actually also authors for the BLM paper that some of you might be familiar with or have read that came out last year. So this model is going to present a very minimalistic design that kind of subsumes several different pre-training paradigms that have been used in previous works. So it can be applied to like a wide variety of downstream tasks and actually has achieved state-of-the-art results in many downstream vision and language and vision tasks. So before we dive in, I want to kind of walk you through some background and related work, because I believe that can really help us understand the CoCa approach, because it's built on top of a lot of, I guess, previous research and model designs. So first of all, I think all of us are pretty familiar with the idea of pre-training. So compared to specialized models, I think pre-training foundation models can really help us, reduce amortized training costs if we want to use them on, a lot of downstream tasks. And this can really help push the limits of our models to achieve human level intelligence. And there are two relevant families of pre-training here. First is just the classic visual data set. So we can use them on downstream tasks such as, image classification, localization, or segmentation. And I think in the recent 1 or 2 years, visual language pre-training has become very popular, and there has been a lot of impressive work that came out of this. So visual language pre-training aims to learn multimodal representations from, both the image modality and the language modality. So usually it's trained on large scale image text pairs that's crawled from the web. So it can really help us to improve a lot of downstream vision and language tasks. And image text foundation models, as the authors kind of define, is models that subsumes both vision pre-training and visual language pre-training that can be used in a lot of visual tasks and vision and language tasks. So some examples are, the famous OpenAI Clip model that we have all heard of, the Align model by Google Research, the LIT model that we learned earlier on this year in another lab meeting, and also the Meta AI's Flava models. They're all good examples of image text foundation models. So far, a lot of these foundation model candidates, so different model structures have been explored. And I think before we dive into this paper's approach, I want to help us review kind of 3 families of these models, because the CoCa model is going to subsume all of these training paradigms in their design. And I will also review the loss functions a little bit just to help us recap. So first of all, it's the single encoder model we talked about that's pre-trained on with cross-entropy loss image classification data sets. However, this kind of model, because they don't really bake in knowledge of free-form human natural language, so it's hard to, this hinders their ability to be applied to downstream vision and language tasks. And then we have dual encoder models. So here we kind of adding additional text encoder. So we train 2 parallel encoders with contrastive loss. So we can really use these kind of models such as CLIP to do zero-shot image text classification or zero-shot image text retrieval. And the third family is the generative family, which is generative pre-training with the encoder plus decoder approach to learn, generic vision and multimodal representations. So this kind of model can output, a joint multimodal representation that can be used for multimodal understanding tasks. So first of all, single encoder classification. This is just the good old cross entropy loss. Because we have labeled data sets such as, ImageNet, Instagram, or JFT, we can really use our ground truth label here to generate, one-hot or multi-hot smooth label distributions to optimize our cross entropy loss. And for dual encoder contrastive learning, this is, just to recap, this is a contrastive loss objective. So basically, this kind of approach exploits, noisy web scale text descriptions for different images. So we are really trying to maximize the cosine similarities between image and text that share, the same or very close semantic meanings. So by projecting them into the same kind of latent space, we can really jointly optimize our text and vision encoders. And here, just to recap, xi are the normalized embeddings for the image in the ith pair, and yj here is the normalized text embedding from text in the jth pair. And then to maximize the image to text probability and text to image probability for the correct matched pair of image and text, we can train our encoders in parallel. And here, this is the graph for the clip model that uses exactly the contrastive loss formulation. And next, we have our encoder-decoder captioning models. So this is a generative approach. So we want the model to really predict the exact token text of Y, matched with image or image and text autoregressively. And a good example of this is just the SynVLM paper I was mentioning. And so following the standard, image encoder, we can use the latent encoded image features to feed into the text decoder. So we can maximize the conditional likelihood of the paired text Y under this forward autoregressive factorization here. And CoCa approach kind of combines both the contrastive approach like clip and the captioning approach, just like SynVLM. So basically, they propose this minimalistic design to pre-train the image text encoder decoder foundation model with both the contrastive loss and the captioning loss that we were looking at. And how they achieve this is that they decoupled the decoder transformer into two parts. So first part, they have the unimodal text decoder. This first part is in parallel with the image encoder. So once they have an image and text pair, they would feed them, separately through, the image encoder and the unimodal text decoder first. And then they will use the outputs from these two parts to compute their contrastive loss objective. And then they are going to feed, these first part of the output into the multimodal text decoder layers. So, and then at this point, we're going to start performing cross attention, where we use the outputs from the image encoder to cross attend to information in the multimodal text decoder, so we can generate joint, multimodal representations, and then compute our captioning loss, like we were discussing in the encoder-decoder kind of formulation. And furthermore, I want to note here, so this CoCa model is actually going to be trained on both image annotation data and noisy image text data. But here, when they use image annotation data, they're actually going to treat all labels as text. So they're going to follow something like the clip approach, where they just insert the label into a prompt So if your image label is a cat, then they would just use the prompt, a photo of a cat animal as the text description. So the author described this as, really, this is kind of similar to the single encoder approach where they're using, image annotation as very fine-grained signal to train, to optimize for their captioning loss here. So that's why they describe this model as an approach that subsumes all three training paradigms we discussed above in the background section. And I think the good thing is here is that because they have the captioning loss and the contrastive loss, they can really use this model very easily to a lot of downstream tasks, but with very lightweight fine tuning or changes to the model architecture. And to look at the CoCa model in a little bit detail, here's another illustration of the model with, I think, more granularity here. So first of all, on the right, this is the CoCa loss function. So essentially, it's just a weighted sum of the contrastive loss and the captioning loss that we defined in the previous section. And the lambda here are just weighing parameters. And you might be wondering, how, because contrastive loss and captioning loss are computed quite differently, and how do they actually achieve both in the same model? So I think I'm gonna kind of walk you through layer by layer. So first, so for the contrastive loss, as you may know, that we require the one image embedding from the image side and the text embedding from the text side, and kind of compute the cosine similarity between these two vectors so we can optimize for contrastive loss. So, but if we want to do cross attention with a text decoder, we also need image outputs that probably contains a sequence of image token embeddings. So they kind of require different dimensions of outputs. That's why the author proposed to add this attentional pooling layer at the end of image encoder so that they can really output different outputs of different dimensions depending on what kind of objectives they're trying to compute. And attentional pooler here is actually just a single multi-head attention layer with n subscript query, learnable queries with image encoder outputs as both keys and values. So for example, and to compute the contrastive loss, we only need one embedding. So we would set n query as 1. So we would have this orange output here to feed into the contrastive loss calculation. And then if we want a sequence of image outputs to use for cross attention, the authors actually are setting n query into 256. So you achieve the sequence of kind of blue squares that symbolizes a sequence of outputs. So they're so in this image and their pseudocode, this is done like in parallel. So this is like two different poolers in parallel extracting different outputs. But however, in their application study, they actually mentioned they realized that building this contrastive pooler on top of the generative pooler achieves better performance. So that kind of cascade design is what they use in default. But this is just one design detail here. And on the left-hand side, we want a text embedding that kind of encodes a generalized meaning of the whole sentence. And how the authors achieve that is that they are appending a learnable CLS token at the end of each sentence. So as you might recall, because we're doing causally masked self-attention here in the decoder, so only the last token can really attend to all previous words and kind of have a general representation of the whole sentence. So we are using the CLS token output embedding to feed into the contrastive loss computation here. And for the captioning loss, like we mentioned, we're just doing cross attention in the next part, the multimodal text decoder. And something to note here is that the multimodal text decoder and the unimodal text decoder have the same number of layers, just to balance information out. And here's the pseudocode. I'm not going to go line by line here, but we can come back to this if you have questions about the model architecture. So basically, as we just talked about, because they have captioning laws and also contrastive laws, these two different objectives at different layers of the model, this model can be applied to a very large variety of downstream tasks, including zero-shot transfer, because they have the parallel text and text decoder and image encoder. And they also can do frozen feature evaluation using just an image encoder. So what they do later on is that during their experiments, so is that they're going to keep the image encoder frozen, and they just add a new pooler to aggregate features and then fine tune that pooling layer so they can kind of apply the model to different tasks. They also did experiments with video action recognition, which I think is pretty interesting as well. So what they are doing here, they are just, using different frames of videos and then feeding those different frames of the video into the image encoder separately. And then they are going to aggregate, the spatial and temporal information from the embeddings, and then adding this attentional pooling layer on top with softmax cross entropy if they want to do video action classification. And if they want to do zero-shot video text retrieval, it's even simpler. So they just average the embeddings of the image encoder outputs, and then use that to compute cosine similarity with the text outputs. So without further ado, let's look at their experimental results. Before we do that, I actually want to talk a little bit about their training data. So they actually trained on the JFT3B data set with label names as paired text, as we discussed. And this data set contains nearly 3 billion images. And they also use the Align data set with noisy text image pairs, which contains, I think, slightly over 1 billion image text pairs. So this image, I think this data set is really big. So that means they are having around 4 billion kind of image text pairs. And this kind of scale is something that I have not really seen in other pre-trained models. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind when we look at the results later on as well. And they trained all the model parameters from scratch. So they did not, pre-train the image encoder or anything first, just for simplicity and pre-training efficiency. Okay, here is a graph that kind of summarizes their performance on a variety of different downstream tasks. That includes, ImageNet classification, captioning, visual reasoning, visual entailment, zero-shot classification, VQA. And the purple part is the CoCa results. And they are comparing the CoCa results with a lot of the state-of-the-art specialized models and other very strong baselines. And the authors have claimed that they achieved state-of-the-art results in many of these tasks. And we're going to look at them kind of separately in this section. So first, they did experiments with visual recognition tasks. So on the table on the left, we have image classification performance, and the table on the right shows the video action recognition performance. With the frozen version, it's just what we were talking, they keep the encoder frozen and then just train additional attentional pooling layers on top, where the fine-tuned version, I believe, is that they are fine-tuning the whole encoder. So the frozen version has achieved very competitive performance compared to strong baselines, and the fine-tune model achieved state-of-the-art results compared to all of the other models. In terms of zero-shot image text retrieval, So they use 3 versions of the CoCa: CoCa base, large, and CoCa. CoCa is actually the largest model here. And then you can see that CoCa base already, I think, has achieved stronger performances on zero-shot tasks compared to most of the zero-shot models that famous zero-shot models. And then CoCa achieved state-of-the-art results on both Flickr30K and MS CoCo. Again, for image classification, this graph kind of illustrated how CoCa performs in relation to other state-of-the-art models we have seen so far. So CoCa actually achieved a state-of-the-art 91% ImageNet top 1 accuracy. And for zero-shot, they actually achieved state-of-the-art results as well, compared to the current, I think, strongest baseline, which is the basic model. Despite that having fewer parameters than basic. And for zero-shot video retrieval, we can see that this is also very strong performance compared to the other baselines in terms of both text-to-video retrieval and video-to-text retrieval. And multi-model understanding tasks, they mainly look at 3 different tasks to test the model's performance on visual question answering, visual entailment, and visual reasoning. And CoCa has achieved state-of-the-art results again as well compared to all the other models. In terms of image captioning, they did experiments on the MS CoCo dataset and no caps dataset, which is a pretty hard baseline, I believe. And the results are pretty impressive as well. And here are just some examples of text captions generated by CoCa with no caps images as input. Okay, so yeah, I think that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, thanks a lot, Elaine.